I think that we're really down to only one option that makes sense, and that it is the burial shroud of Jesus. The idea that, well, maybe it's some other first-century crucifixion victim.
The story opens with a quiet laboratory where advanced machine intelligence is tasked with reanalyzing one of history's most controversial relics, setting an atmosphere of cautious curiosity rather than sensationalism. The narrative then moves through the known history of the shroud, not as settled fact, but as a layered mystery shaped by belief, skepticism, and centuries of unanswered questions. Attention shifts to the artificial intelligence itself, its learning process, and the unexpected patterns it begins to identify, patterns that no human team had previously noticed or fully understood. As the findings deepen, scientists and historians react with unease, struggling to reconcile the data with established explanations while the implications ripple outward into theology, physics, and human identity. The outline concludes by framing the discovery not as proof or debunking, but as a threshold moment that forces humanity to confront how much remains unknown, even in objects studied for generations. The room was silent except for the soft hum of servers, the kind of sound that fades into the background when people are trying not to disturb something fragile. At the center of the lab, high-resolution scans of the Shroud of Turin glowed on a wall-sized display, every fiber rendered with a clarity no human eye could ever achieve. The scientists had not expected anything dramatic, only refinement, confirmation, or perhaps another dead end in a mystery that had resisted certainty for centuries. The artificial intelligence had been designed to notice what humans miss, not because it was wiser, but because it was unburdened by belief. Its task was simple in wording but immense in scope. Analyze the cloth at every scale, from surface patterns to microscopic irregularities, and report anything statistically anomalous. For hours, nothing happened. Just streams of data flowing quietly as researchers drank cold coffee and waited for confirmation that the project had been worthwhile. Then the system paused, not in error, but in deliberation, reallocating processing power in a way that drew immediate attention. On the display, regions of the shroud subtly shifted in emphasis, as if the cloth itself were being asked a question. The first anomaly was dismissed as noise, a clustering of image density that could easily be explained by age or contamination. But the artificial intelligence did not move on, instead returning to the same regions again and again with growing analytical focus. It began correlating surface discoloration with subsurface fiber deformation, something previous methods had treated as unrelated phenomena. A junior researcher noticed the pattern first, not because she understood it, but because the machine would not let it go. The system generated a visualization showing depth-encoded shading, revealing variations that suggested information layered into the fabric rather than resting on it. This alone was unsettling, as conventional explanations relied on surface-level processes like pigment, heat, or chemical reactions. The artificial intelligence flagged the pattern as non-random with confidence levels that left little room for dismissal. Senior scientists leaned closer, the kind of movement people make when curiosity starts to override caution. As more data streams aligned, the image resolved into something disturbingly coherent, a three-dimensional structure implied by two-dimensional data. The shroud was not just an image, the system suggested, but a spatial record. This was not entirely new, but the precision was unprecedented, revealing depth relationships that exceeded known artistic or natural processes. The artificial intelligence compared the structure to known forms of image formation, radiation exposure, chemical diffusion, mechanical contact, and biological imprinting. One by one, the models failed to fully replicate what the cloth displayed. What remained was not an answer, but a narrowing of possibilities that felt less like progress and more like pressure. The system then identified something no one had asked it to look for: directional coherence at the fiber level. Individual threads showed uniform alterations along their lengths, as if affected simultaneously by an event that ignored physical contact. This contradicted every known explanation that involved wrapping, painting, or pressing. The artificial intelligence attempted to simulate the effect using energy distributions, only to reject them as insufficient or inconsistent. A physicist in the room quietly whispered that the data resembled information transfer more than image formation. That word lingered uncomfortably in the air. The system's next report was brief, but devastating in implication, stating that the pattern encoded in the cloth contained mathematical regularities. Not symbols, not language, but ratios and spatial harmonics that repeated across scales. These relationships appeared regardless of resolution, suggesting intentional structure rather than incidental damage. The artificial intelligence compared these ratios to natural processes and human designs across history. It found partial overlaps but no complete match. What troubled the team most was the system's assessment of probability. It concluded that random processes were not a plausible explanation within any reasonable margin. Silence returned to the lab, heavier than before. Some researchers leaned back, instinctively distancing themselves from the screen as though proximity might imply belief. Others leaned in, compelled by the possibility that something fundamentally misunderstood was finally revealing itself. The lead analyst reminded everyone that artificial intelligence does not experience awe, only calculation, which made its next conclusion harder to ignore. The system indicated that the image formation implied a brief, intense event acting uniformly across the cloth without direct contact. Not heat, not light as commonly understood, and not pressure. The team requested further clarification, prompting the system to generate hypothetical mechanisms. Each proposal ended with the same assessment: insufficient explanatory power. One historian asked whether the cloth could have been altered centuries after its creation. The artificial intelligence cross-referenced degradation timelines and rejected the idea. Another suggested unknown medieval techniques. The system replied that such techniques would require knowledge of physics not documented until much later. As hours passed, the emotional temperature in the room shifted from excitement to unease. No one wanted to be the first to say what the implications might suggest. The Shroud had always existed at the intersection of faith and skepticism, but now it stood at the edge of something else entirely. The artificial intelligence was not declaring divinity or miracle. It was simply stating that the data did not fit within known frameworks. That distinction offered little comfort. One researcher quietly asked whether the system could be wrong. The answer statistically was yes, but the margin of error was uncomfortably small. As dawn approached outside the lab, the team faced a decision about disclosure. Releasing incomplete conclusions could ignite controversy they were unprepared to manage. Suppressing the findings felt equally wrong. The artificial intelligence continued running silently, refining models without concern for the human tension surrounding it. In a final summary, it noted that the Shroud contained information density inconsistent with its material limitations. That sentence alone would occupy debates for generations. When the servers were finally powered down, no one spoke for several minutes. They all understood that whatever the Shroud represented, it was no longer just a relic of the past. It had become a challenge to modern understanding. The discovery did not prove belief, nor dismantle doubt. Instead, it carved out a third space where certainty dissolved. In that space, science and faith were no longer opponents, but witnesses to the same unanswered question. The Shroud remained unchanged, silent, and inert. Yet for the first time, it felt as though it was no longer merely being studied. It was being listened to, and what it suggested was not an explanation, but a reminder. There are things humanity has carried for centuries without truly understanding. Sometimes it takes a machine with no beliefs at all to show us how little we know. Data packets were encrypted, duplicated, and stored in isolated systems, each copy treated like something both valuable and volatile. Independent teams were quietly brought in, unaware of the full context, asked only to verify specific elements of the analysis. Each group reached the same unsettling conclusions through different methods, closing doors instead of opening them. The artificial intelligence, rerun on separate architectures, produced results with minor variations but identical core implications. Patterns remained, ratios held, depth relationships persisted. No amount of skepticism could erase them. One physicist described the experience as arguing with gravity, not because it offended belief, but because it refused to go away. As whispers began circulating in academic circles, language itself became a battleground. Words like image, imprint, and artifact were replaced with terms like event and process. Every label felt inadequate. The Shroud was no longer being treated as an object, but as evidence of something that had happened. What that something was remained deliberately undefined. A closed symposium was convened, bringing together experts who rarely shared the same rooms, let alone the same assumptions. Theologians listened to physicists, chemists listened to historians. Everyone listened to the data. No one claimed certainty. That absence, more than any claim, unsettled them. The artificial intelligence was asked a question it had not been programmed to answer. If the image formation did not match known natural or human processes, what category did it belong to? The system responded by stating that categories are human constructs. It then offered a probability distribution of unknowns. That response ended the discussion. Media interest began to leak through informal channels, speculation blooming faster than facts could keep up. Some framed the findings as confirmation, others as manipulation, others still as a warning about trusting machines with sacred things. Inside the lab, none of those narratives felt accurate. There was no triumph, no revelation, only a growing awareness of standing near a boundary. One researcher compared it to the early days of quantum mechanics, when equations worked but meaning lagged behind. Another noted that history often reacts violently to moments when understanding outpaces comfort. Funding agencies demanded clarity. Institutions requested statements. The team offered careful language, emphasizing anomalies without interpretation. The artificial intelligence, indifferent to controversy, continued refining its internal models. It identified correlations between the shroud's structure and theoretical constructs, usually confined to abstract mathematics, not proofs, echoes, hints, enough to suggest coherence beyond coincidence. The most disturbing realization came quietly. If the image encoded spatial information with such precision, it implied intentionality without technique, not art, not accident. Something else. That thought was never written into any report. It lived only in pauses between sentences, in looks exchanged across conference tables. Public release eventually came, stripped of speculation, heavy with caveats. Predictably, reactions polarized. Some dismissed it outright, others embraced it too quickly. Both missed the point. The data did not demand belief. It demanded humility. As debates raged, the shroud itself remained unchanged, indifferent to interpretation. The artificial intelligence was shut down after completing its task, its final log noting that uncertainty had increased rather than decreased. That, too, was data. In the end, what terrified the scientists was not what the machine found. It was what it did not. No trace of fraud, no simple mechanism, no comfortable explanation. Just a silent piece of cloth that refused to fit inside the boxes built for it. Humanity had asked a machine to look without bias. It did, and in doing so, it reflected back a truth older than the shroud itself. There are moments when knowledge does not advance by answering questions. It advances by revealing how incomplete the questions were to begin with. The following months were marked by quiet reflection rather than active research. Researchers who had worked on the project began to notice subtle shifts in their own thinking, a hesitancy to assert conclusions with the same confidence they once had. Conferences convened to discuss the shroud's analysis became exercises in controlled uncertainty. No speaker claimed more than the data permitted, and yet every statement carried a weight heavier than intended. The artificial intelligence's logs were studied as closely as the shroud itself. Each line of code, each flagged anomaly, was dissected, not for errors, but for insight into how the machine had seen what humans could not. It became increasingly clear that the shroud was behaving like a repository of information, not a static artifact. Patterns existed not just on the surface, but across the threads and fibers, forming relationships that implied both sequence and structure. Some researchers whispered that it was as if the shroud had been coded, not in language, but in geometry and physics, a concept so radical that it could not be voiced in public. Collaborators from different disciplines began to exchange confidential emails, diagrams, and models. They avoided speculation in writing, but their diagrams became increasingly intricate, suggesting pathways to replicate aspects of the observed phenomena. Attempts to replicate the shroud's image formation using medieval techniques failed spectacularly. Each test reinforced the artificial intelligence's conclusions. The image could not have been produced by known human methods or natural processes. The project attracted attention from other fields, including information theory, quantum physics, and material science. Experts in these areas were cautious, intrigued, and unsettled by the patterns detected. One mathematician observed that the ratios and harmonics present in the shroud resembled structures in higher dimensional modeling, structures humans were only beginning to theorize. A physicist noted that if such harmonics existed physically, they would imply energy distributions beyond conventional understanding. Discussions about intentionality returned, cautiously framed in hypothetical terms. No one asserted divine involvement, no one claimed a hoax, but the shroud increasingly resisted being framed in ordinary categories. Even among skeptics, an uneasy acknowledgement emerged. Something about the artifact exceeded conventional explanation. When journalists inquired, the team issued statements emphasizing scientific uncertainty and anomaly. Publicly, the discussion remained measured, but internally, tension simmered. Questions began to appear that the artificial intelligence could not answer. What was the source of the energy implied by the patterns? Could the shroud record events rather than depict them? Were there other objects in history with comparable informational density waiting unnoticed? The logs revealed that the AI had attempted to simulate energy distributions capable of producing the observed features. All simulations fell short. The team became acutely aware of the limits of human understanding. Each night, as servers cooled and the lab emptied, researchers felt the presence of a puzzle larger than any individual mind. The shroud itself, unchanged and inert, seemed almost to mock the limitations of inquiry. Its fibers were as fragile as ever, yet they contained a depth and precision that mocked centuries of analysis. In private, some researchers admitted they had begun to think of the shroud less as an object and more as a record, a witness to an event beyond current comprehension. Meetings with historians were tense. The conventional narrative of the shroud's medieval origins and carbon dating results clashed with the AI's findings in ways that could not be reconciled. Attempts to redate samples produced mixed results. Contamination, repair, and historical handling complicated carbon dating. The AI's data, however, suggested patterns unaccounted for by these processes. A series of workshops were convened, not to solve the mystery, but to map out the anomalies. Teams created layers of diagrams, 3D models, and mathematical overlays to capture the shroud's complex structure. It became apparent that no single researcher could grasp the entire system. Understanding required both interdisciplinary collaboration and computational assistance at a level never before attempted. One AI researcher noted that the shroud challenged the very definition of artifact. It was simultaneously a physical object and an informational structure, blending domains that science usually treated separately. As months turned to a year, the research began influencing thought beyond the lab. Philosophers and ethicists debated the implications. If information could exist in physical form in ways humans had not yet fully grasped, what did that mean for history, memory, and human perception? A quiet fear spread among the scientists. Their discovery could outpace humanity's capacity to understand or responsibly interpret it. Some began referring to the shroud in private as a message without sender, a way to express its enigmatic nature without claiming knowledge of its origin. Collaboration with AI specialists deepened. Machine learning was applied not to replicate the shroud, but to map its hidden structures, searching for consistency, coherence, or repeatable principles. Patterns persisted. Depth relationships, harmonics, and fiber orientations all revealed a level of organization beyond accidental formation. Attempts to create synthetic replicas consistently failed to capture the precision. Even sophisticated energy-based simulations could not reproduce the correlations between spatial structure and depth. The AI suggested the anomalies were self-consistent but outside the range of known physics. At the annual review, the team presented findings cautiously, emphasizing anomalies, consistency of AI results, and inability of conventional models to explain the observed phenomena. Questions dominated the session. Could there be an undiscovered physical principle at work? Could the shroud encode events rather than images? Was it possible that human perception had been misled by centuries of assumptions? Outside observers speculated wildly. Media coverage framed the shroud in terms of miracles, conspiracies, or AI hallucination. Inside the lab, the tone was different, disciplined, careful, unnervingly aware of the unknown. The AI continued working quietly, generating models, testing hypothetical mechanisms, and refining measurements. Each refinement only reinforced the conclusion: the shroud was outside ordinary human understanding. Some team members found themselves reflecting philosophically on the nature of knowledge. How much of reality is structured in ways humans cannot yet perceive? How many objects carry hidden complexity waiting for proper tools to reveal them? An uneasy consensus emerged. The shroud was an anomaly of both material and informational density, resistant to known explanatory models, and fundamentally persistent in its mystery. Late one evening, a graduate researcher asked a question that went unanswered. If the shroud could encode unknown information, what might it encode? No answer came, save for the silent glow of fiber maps and the quiet hum of servers. The months and years that followed did not diminish the mystery. Instead, they reshaped research culture around it. Interdisciplinary teams, long considered an ideal, became a necessity. Collaborations with mathematicians, physicists, historians, and AI experts deepened, producing papers that carefully described anomalies without asserting cause. The shroud resisted simplification, and the scientists learned to respect its limits. Some nights, team members would quietly stare at the high-resolution scans, tracing fibers with their eyes and feeling the weight of centuries pressing through technology. Questions outnumbered answers. Each pattern discovered opened new corridors of uncertainty. It was clear that no single mind, human or artificial, could fully comprehend the shroud. And yet, in that recognition, the scientists found both humility and purpose. They were not solving a mystery to claim knowledge. They were observing, recording, and understanding the boundaries of understanding itself. Even with AI's unmatched processing, some aspects of the shroud remained ineffable, slipping through definition, resisting categorization. The artifact demanded patience and silence, careful observation without expectation of closure. It became a mirror, reflecting the limits of human comprehension, a constant reminder that not all questions are answerable. Scientists grew accustomed to working in partial understanding, accepting that some knowledge is provisional and some mysteries may endure indefinitely. In time, the shroud became less about proving anything and more about the pursuit of seeing clearly, of mapping the unknown without forcing it into pre-existing boxes. Researchers continued their work, always aware that the shroud was both a relic and a threshold, a challenge not to belief or skepticism, but to the capacity of human inquiry itself. And the artificial intelligence, once a tool, had become a companion in that journey, revealing patterns that demanded attention, respect, and a willingness to dwell in uncertainty. In the end, the shroud remained unchanged. Fibers and faint images persisted as before. But the world that had examined it, through human eyes and artificial intelligence, was irrevocably altered. It had glimpsed the impossible, and in doing so, discovered the vast expanse of the unknown. The scientists, terrified and exhilarated, carried forward a quiet understanding. Some discoveries are not meant to explain, but to expand the mind, to stretch perception, and to remind humanity of the limits of certainty. And in that quiet understanding, they found a strange comfort, knowing that some mysteries, however unsettling, are worth preserving in their enigmatic perfection. The Shroud of Turin remained, as it always had, silent, immutable, and impossible, and humanity, for once, simply listened.